Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Reason Through podcast, a show dedicated to having charitable philosophical discussions, as well as helping you, the listener, develop and reason through your views. In this episode, I bring back Dr. Chad Bogosian. We speak on a form of naturalistic ethics known as Kantianism. Kantianism tries to establish objectivity through pure reason. So, this is just using reason as a way of deducing first principles on how we should live our lives. So without further ado, I bring you Dr. Chad Bogosian. All right, so I have back with us Dr. Chad Bogosian. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so we'll be finishing up what has now become, I would say, like a little mini series on ethics. We are going to be discussing Kantian ethics in particular, and it's also kind of known as deontological ethics, I believe. And just to keep in mind for our listeners, there are other versions of ethics that we really haven't been touching upon. So this was because I felt that this was the most common, the common views that most people kind of hold within our society. So just to keep that in mind. But anyway, yeah, we can get right into the topic. Kant begins like his groundwork by identifying first what it means to have kind of like a goodwill. He begins this because he believes that this is the only way to make sense of what a goodwill is, because the goodwill is the only kind of goodness, I guess, that could be without qualification. But he also thinks it's without qualification, but it also has like this absolute worth. And so I guess he's claimed this because he believes it's unconditional, because I guess a goodwill can never be what he said is complicit in the bad, kind of like other character traits. And he uses a kind of an example such as like the courage it takes to be a better thief. It's absolute worth because goodwill is independent of what it accomplishes or brings about, kind of in contrast to consequentialism, to where this is only worthy because of the utility that it brings.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great place for us to start today. And maybe if I could just give a couple background qualifications just to situate this in our previous discussions, that might be helpful to some people. But when we talked about utilitarianism, for example, the idea of whether the ends justify the means. So the ends that my action pursues and seeks out and produces, whether those can be justified, be those turn to justify the means used to get there. And on utilitarianism, we said for sure, right? You could, in principle, in theory, use what's appear to be immoral means or steps taken to bring about moral ends. Like in the trolley car case we talked about, it would be okay to pull a lever to intentionally end the life of one innocent person to save five lives if the case is built just right. And so that's in a great example where the ends justify the means used, even though the means are very uncomfortable for many people when we think about them. Kant, on the other hand, says no, the ends do not justify the means. We have to both will good moral means to the good moral end. And so the question is going to become not only what are the ends we're seeking, but what means are used to the end. And so for him, both of those matter. How we're motivated, and that's part of the means, matters. And that's where this concept you brought up, Jacob, of the goodwill comes in, because for him, there's got to be something that is really that is driving the duty that I'm performing, right? So you said deontology at the beginning, and that word, don't let that scare you if you've never heard that before. That just simply means duty, right? Or what makes an action right or wrong is if it's one of our moral duties or obligations that we have to either perform or refrain from performing, let's say. And so I need to not only perform my duties, but I need to do them simply because they're my duties. And that's what a part of what a goodwill is. It's somebody who's not just trying to do what they ought to do, but do it in a sense simply because it's the right thing to do, regardless of what the consequences are. In fact, on Kant's view, we could do the right thing simply because it's the right thing, and it have bad consequences, particularly for me. Like I might not like how it makes me feel, or it might bring negative consequences to myself or others. But what matters most is that it's the right thing to do, and we can work out more of the idea of goodwill, but that is very central to him. Let me just say one more quick thing. So there are other intrinsic goods for him. We've used this language before in our previous discussions. There's a distinction in ethics between instrumental value, what we use, that would be means, right? Something is an instrument to an end. And so something could be valuable as an instrument, like my car getting me to the grocery store is a valuable instrument to get me there. But then there's the question of whether things have inherent or intrinsic value. And for Kant, he believes there's more than one thing that has intrinsic value, but some of all those other things are going to be intrinsically valuable only with certain qualifications, like moral virtue, for example, or success or happiness. And as you said very well, the only thing that's intrinsically good without qualification is a goodwill.
Perfect. I think it was well said. So just to kind of recap, with Kant in particular, he wants to say that goodwill is contained within acting dutiful. And kind of going back to what you're saying, so what he, I guess, distinguishes one action, kind of an action from duty, and not merely to conform with duty. He kind of gives this thought experiment of a shoekeeper who kind of merely acts from self-interest or inclination. So he's conforming with duty, but meaning that as the shopkeeper, he is fair to everyone. He doesn't rip anyone off. He makes all his sales and all his products honestly, but he's not really acting from duty. He's doing this because of his own self-interest to keep his business kind of alive. And so what Kant says is that, well, this person isn't really acting from duty, so he's not really acting morally. He's just acting from this kind of self-inclination or this self-preservation or desire. And so he wants to make kind of the distinction between, I get what you also said about instrumental value and intrinsic value, where this thing is only good because it's merely a means to my end, which is the end goal. So driving a car to get to, go get groceries or something, that is the car is instrumental value because I'm using it as a means to an end. It's not because the car has any intrinsic value to anything. And I think so he makes those kind of distinctions between like acting from duty and conforming just merely from duty.
Yeah, that's great. That was all well said. And I think the one addition here that's important, why for him this idea of something being good without qualification is important, is he thinks these other goods like courage, moral courage, or kindness, these virtues, and he thinks those are virtues and they're intrinsically valuable. His concern is that those can uh, fall into the same trap you mentioned with the storekeeper. A person could say, "Oh, I should be courageous here. I should stand up for what's right in the workplace." But what you're really doing it for, what's motivating the courage, is something like winning employee of the month or getting a bigger bonus or something like this. And so the courage is good, but it's not intrinsically good because when we see that courage can be misused, right? It can be misapplied. It indicates that courage uh, is not good without qualification. Same for happiness and same for intellectual talent. But the goodwill, in his view, he's convinced that the goodwill, a person with goodwill and who acts from it, does their duty for the sake of duty, that can't be misused. And so maybe here would be interesting for at least to raise a potential objection where other non-Kantian ethicists will push on that a little bit and they'll say, well, wait a second, couldn't a person be doing their duty from what, as best as they could tell, they've discerned from the reason, and deduced from, as we'll say, the categorical imperative, but they still bring about really bad results. In other words, they misuse their goodwill. So here's an example. The book that I was looking at in preparation said, well, what about Adolf Hitler? Could a case be made that he was actually, in his own mind, a person of goodwill? He thought he had a duty to orchestrate the mass extermination of Jews, and he was acting from that sense of duty in so doing. He wasn't doing it for notoriety or or wealth. He was doing it simply because it was his duty. But now we've got a problem where it seems like a person could be a person of goodwill, but they're still producing really horrific ends, right? Horrific consequences. And so that's something we're thinking about. But Kant is convinced that, and we'll look at how he would push back in a second, but that a person of goodwill is good without qualification. They're doing their duty for its own sake, not for what it will generate them. And so therefore it can't be misapplied or something.
Right. And so I guess this goes into for Kant. So what he's been doing also, right? He's been kind of conceptually analyzing what it means to be a dutiful agent and on which the principle an agent ought to be acting on. So I guess as a response towards that kind of objection, What Kant, I think, would say is that, well, there's a supreme principle that he's trying to figure out and trying to kind of discern, and that's one that's independent of our desires and inclinations, and one that is also kind of universally binding. So this kind of brings about what he would call like the first maxim or the supreme principle, which is I ought to proceed except in a way that I could will that my maxim become a universal law, end quote. He uses this example kind of as like promise keeping, and kind of we can go back to your example of like with Adolf Hitler, to where, well, I think Kant would say like, well, no, you can't actually, that's wrong for him to do that because he's not acting on the maxim, because that's not something that we would want to kind of universalize.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. So again, let me just reflect some of that back to get myself clear here. Yeah, I think um, for him, he's most interested. Again, to situate him historically, he's a rationalist, not an empiricist. And why that's important is utilitarianism is a kind of empiricism, right? Through, I mean, they value reason, but there are these there's this empirical data set that's informing in some ways, at least with contemporary utilitarianism, how we know what the negative versus the good consequences are. For Kant, he thinks by pure reason alone, we can just discern, we can come to apprehend and know morally what our moral duties are. And so once one way we do that is through this first maxim that you said. And the maxim is just an action guiding principle. An action guiding principle that is, in theory, applicable to all people in places and time. So it's not based on their culture. It's not based on whether or not they believe in God or any of the things we've talked about in previous episodes. It's that, they, being a rational agent, have that capacity like any other human being or any other rational agent, and can use that to now, let's say, figure out what maxim or rule rule guiding principle they're acting on in this particular case. And then not only whether they want to do that, but whether they should do it in light of whether it could be acted upon by everyone universally. And so what was the example you just used? Promise keeping, is that what you mentioned?
His example is I need money, and the only way for me to get this money is if I make a false promise.
Right.
And so the question then I have to ask myself is, should I make the false promise to get the money that I need? And so according to his kind of principle, kind of willing an action that's universal, is that something we actually can bring about? So if everyone in our society um, acted on this principle that I'm going to request for something that I need, my intention is to break my promise, this false promise keeping, is that something that we actually can live about? And what Kant says is that that actually should be denied because, for one, there's no point of promises anymore. It kind of just renders that kind of principle kind of useless, I guess, at that point. It doesn't mean anything and now to hold a promise between one another. And so that's something that he was saying. And I think that kind of that would apply to, in the case of like Hitler, if someone were to push back on that, where it's like, I don't think someone can universalize such a maxim or universalize such a principle that we all should act on in that way.
Yeah, good. I think what's helpful about that example is maybe one way that helps me to think about this very rationalistic kind of cognitive way of coming at ethics is you might break it down in 3 steps. Step 1 is write out your principle that you want to act on. And in this case, it's, when I need money, it's okay to tell you, to get you to lend me the money and tell you that I promise to pay you back, even though I don't intend to do so, or something like that. So that'd be your whole principle. Write that down. Then step 2 is write it down in a universal sense that anyone who needs money can go to a friend and borrow it and promise to pay it back, even though they know they don't intend to do so. And then step 3 is to ask, this is the important part, is does this lead to some kind of either logical inconsistency or contradiction, or a practical inconsistency or contradiction? What I like about what you said is it's the second one. It leads to this pretty clearly in this case, it leads to a practical inconsistency where if we all start getting wind of everyone's going to be making promises they don't intend to keep, well, then promise making as an sort of social practice gets defeated, right? It gets undermined, and social cohesion breaks down. And so if we can make the case that universalizing my principle for everyone would lead to social, disruption and breakdown, well, then that's a reliable indicator that it's a false principle, and so it would be wrong to do what you want to do.
What I want to push back on or would say is like, well, doesn't that seem that we're falling into some type of consequential reasoning there? Because while the principle doesn't seem in and itself wrong, it's just the only thing that's really making it wrong is that kind of it's going to bring down kind of social utility to where no one's going to be making promises anymore. And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just we can't universalize that such a principle.
Yeah, and again, I think Kant or Kantians might say something like, well, it's subtle, but what's important here is that you've just worked through a deductive argument, not about making promises you don't intend to keep, producing certain consequences or other. Like the argument here is that you ought to keep promises because, or make promises you only intend to keep because it's going to make the world a better place or maximize utility. So it comes after the because is really important. The because is that it leads to the logical inconsistency. What's the logical inconsistency? It's that it does lead to something, but it's not the consequences that are giving it its oomph, so to speak. It's when you work through the logical steps, you're deducing the contradiction where I'm both willing at the same time that you do it and not do it, but then it can't be both of those, right? So that would be the logical framing of it. I agree with you that when you run it the social cohesion route, it starts very quickly sounding utilitarian. But I think at least in my estimation, the best he can do there is really just press it. Well, look, I'm walking through logical steps, and it's not initially, the question isn't, well, what's the greatest good for the most people? That's the principle. No, the principle for Kant is, am I acting on the maxim, right? And it's not a utilitarian maxim. It's a very rational kind of act analysis or maxim or something like that. Does that make sense? I'm not saying he's right about that, but does that kind of help a little bit with that sort of
Yeah.
objection? What do you
Yeah,
think?
no.
To follow
So
that
I
up.
understand. So one you're saying is that well, here's the principle here that I'm wishing to universalize, and this is what kind of it illogically entails. So we're not even speaking about social utility. It's just that may just be the consequence of the principle, where you have the other side, the consequentialist saying, we're going to maximize social utility. We're starting at that like baseline. And is this going to maximize your utility? So that's what I hear you saying. There's also another critique as well that I find it's very subtle. Michael Sandel, he says this in his book, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do? What he said was that the utilitarian or the psychological egoist is wanting to maximize my own happiness and then the happiness as a whole for society. Uh, that kind of intention is inherently different than putting my own desire first. So in kind of like the steps that you had laid out, here's the principle. Can I maximize it? What can it be maximized? And then what does it kind of logically entail? So in that process, what Michael Sandel was saying is like you're putting other people's desires before your own desire, and that's a very subtle distinction as opposed to some type of utilitarian or consequentialist thinking, where it's like what action is going to bring about my either own happiness or the happiness as a society as a whole.
Yeah, I like that a lot. How you said that from Sandel, and what I like about that also is that it may be one wording change, that I would have maybe make different than if Sandel is using desire. I think for Kant, really, it's I'm putting your good or the human good uh, apart from what human desire is. This is the rationalism in him, right? Where he's different than Hume and anyone else. What the right thing to do is, what my duties are going to turn out to be are probably almost always different than what I want, unless I'm a person of goodwill. And that's because we can want what's not good for us or what's good for other people. And so what I'm asking in my maxim, right, is not what are the consequences, but what are the duties that I owe you, so to speak, right? What duties do I have towards you or towards myself? And that is, in a way, if you will, putting humanity more generally ahead of my own wants. And that's a really important thing here in the Kantian scheme, because, and we could bring suicide up here, but it has to come up because he mentioned suicide, and he believes suicide is always wrong. And you can get there from this principle or this version of the categorical imperative or the second version as well that we'll get to, I think. But what's important for him is you can actually mistreat yourself. And so he favors autonomy, rational autonomy, but within rational limits. And so I could actually want what's bad for myself, and I can come to know that it's bad for myself by reasoning through the maxim I want to perform or the rule I want to act on towards myself. So, but in that way, I'm still putting humanity and my humanness ahead of my individual subjective preferences, so to speak. And that's a really important thing. And I like that Sandel says that, and bringing in desire and the relationship between desire versus um, reason. So reason has to always hold the upper hand over the desire for Kant, as opposed to many of the empiricists like Hume. It's inverted, right? Reason is a slave of the desires, or follows them. It tags along to kind of justify what you want, but it never serves to override, or can't in principle override desire.
Yeah, and I think that's something we'll probably get to this later on too, where for Kant, when it comes to free will, acting morally is the only way, I think, what he would say, to be free, by acting dutifully. That's a way for us to have that free will. But kind of going back to what you're saying a little bit, so Kant states that the dutiful agent follows the laws out of necessitation from reason itself, kind of what you've been kind of highlighting here, in which the principles in which an agent acts on he calls imperatives. And for Kant, there are two types of imperatives. One is the hypothetical imperative, and this imperative has a purpose or a goal in mind. It is not universally binding. It is used to achieve typically an end. And so kind of an example might be like I have the goal, like a goal when I was a student. If I wanted to be a good student, well, what steps do I need to do to become a good student? Well, one just might be studying, right? So if I say, if I want to be a good student, then I ought to study. So I do want to be a good student, therefore I ought to study. So something like that kind of logical structure, where it's just kind of, I'm using studying, the act of studying isn't good in and of itself. It's only good kind of instrumentally because it achieves the end goal that I'm wanting, which is to be that good student.
That's right. And what's important about hypothetical imperatives is, number one, they're still ought statements, what we should do. But number two, you could theoretically opt out of them and you're not going to be evaluated from a moral standpoint as being a bad person. You're free to decide not to be a good college student or be a college student at all. Now, you might have an argument with family members, like parents, let's say, whether you're making a wise decision.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe in that way, morality might enter in kind of from the sideline. But at the end of the day, like we mentioned earlier, getting in your car to go to the grocery store. If I want to get to the grocery store, I got to get in my car, right? So there's nothing right or wrong about that. I could decide I want to walk or ride my bike or take the bus or sit home and wait at home and go tomorrow. But what's different from between that kind of a command or imperative and the categorical imperative is that they're unique. They're also ought statements, but they're binding in a very strong way, where even though by virtue of your free will you could choose to disobey what you ought to do, just like if you need to study to be a good student, you can disobey that. But the disobedience is morally significant here, where what you're actually doing is, as you said, misusing your freedom. You're using your freedom irrationally, and in being irrational in your action or violating the categorical imperative, you're a bad person or an immoral person or doing the wrong thing or something like this.
And so, yeah, and just to kind of piggyback, so the categorical imperative is one that it ought to be followed regardless of whether I desire to not follow it or whether I have an inclination to do the other way. So regardless of the consequences that it produces. So I think of something very simple, such as like just being honest or telling the truth, right? So truth speaking might be, a categorical imperative, even though I may not want to tell the truth, right? And I should tell the truth regardless of the consequences that it brings about. And so like that could be seen as a categorical imperative. But there are three, I think, formulas of that Kant believes that are categorical, that ones that must be followed. And it's not followed in the way that like someone's making you following it. It's followed from the necessitation of reason from this first principle. And so I think the first one is the formula of the universal law, which is I ought to proceed except in a way that I could will that my maxim become a universal law. And I believe that's the first formulation of the formula of universal law.
Yeah. So if those of you who are watching and listening, if you Google this, you'll see some different names given to these, what we're calling versions of the categorical imperative. it's important to point out here that for Kant, there really is one categorical imperative. One metaphor I like here is kind of like a triangle. You have one triangle with three sides, and there you need all three to have a triangle, right? For Kant, we have kind of three versions of the categorical imperative, but they're not three principles. There's one really core principle. It just can be understood three ways, and it helps us navigate different kinds of cases three ways. And the first one can be called a principle of the law of nature, or the human universalizability principle, or something like this. And then he, in his groundwork, works through numerous examples. Truth telling is one of them. False promising is another one, and this sort of thing. So I'll let you pick it up from there.
Right. And so, so that would be, from my understanding, like one of the categorical imperatives. Another one is, maybe this is something that you mentioned, but formula of humanity, and that is to act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or anyone else's, never merely as a means, but also always as an end. And just to kind of highlight this for Kant, I believe, right, this is, it's non-negotiable, right? So it's absolute in this way, that because once we formulated these principles, it's my action or my acting upon this formula or this maxim is done out of the necessitation of reason, but it's also, that's what makes it binding, because that's my duty. It's my duty to never perform an action against it. It's my duty to never use someone, another person, as merely a means, but always as an end.
Yeah, good. So if what I want to do here in this case, or how I want to treat you, I'm questioning how I ought to treat you in this a particular case. If it turns out that, it's a case of, let's say, exploiting you, exploitation would violate this maximum, treating you, never treating you as a means. And why? Well, because when I exploit you, right, what I'm doing is, number one, I'm probably figuring ways around your reasoning abilities. I'm manipulating reason in some way. I'm not presenting you with the evidence and saying, okay, do with it what you will, figure it out and get back to me. What I'm doing is working angles, maybe through deception, maybe lying. And so I take advantage of you as a person to get my ends, right? I use you as kind of a pawn in my scheme. That's what exploiting usually does, right? And so when I exploit you, there's some kind of downgrading of your humanity, your rationality, your moral worth, your dignity. And so if any action can, if I can make the case that it's an example of exploitation, well, then it's going to be a wrong action, like you said, always and everywhere. It's not going to turn out that you could perform that same action in another context and it be right. Okay, so he's not a situational ethicist or something like this. If I really shouldn't exploit people, and this type of action is an example of exploiting, well, then that type of action is always wrong everywhere for everybody. And so it's binding, it's inflexible, it's non-negotiable. Those would all be interchangeable ways of talking about the strength of the moral principles here.
Yeah, and I think also, right, so whether the person is aware that they are doing this already, even though now it's being highlighted, we all act in this way kind of implicitly. So when we see something that is exploitation, the principle you might be operating under, or truth telling, if my intention to tell the truth was to not get in trouble, is that something that is, did I do something right there? And I think most of us, or at least my intuition, just kind of like, not even any argument behind it, is to say, well, no, even though the result was a good, I'm glad you told the truth, but your intention was to, get out of trouble or something like that. When I believe you should just tell the truth, right? To tell the truth, because that's the right thing to do. And so, yeah, if you want to pick up over there, or any
Well,
thoughts on.
so let me use maybe, hopefully this is a fun example. I won't name the business in town, but recently a place we from time to time like to get ice cream changed ownership, and we once they opened up again after kind of pandemic stuff calmed down again under new ownership, I said to my wife, I said, I'm pretty sure their 2-scoop cup is not 2 scoops of ice cream, and I'm sure it's not the same size as the previous ownership gave you. And so we did this a few times, and so one time we got like a single scoop cup and a double scoop cup, and the double scoop looked just like a little bit more than the single scoop. And so I said to her, I said, I'm going to ask them. I don't think they're actually giving us what they're saying they're giving us, even though, you're being charged for this. And so I was sniffing out what I thought was some false advertising, right? And so sure enough, last week we went in there one night and I got us ice cream. And so I said, hey, can I ask you a question? I said, you've got the single scoop cup and it's this price. You got the double scoop cup, it's this price. Is a double scoop cup 2 scoops of ice cream, like 2 of the single scoops in a cup, just 2 of them. And the worker looked at me and she tried to reflect back what I was saying, and I could tell she understood, but she was uncomfortable with the question, right? And she said, well, yeah, it's 2 scoops of ice cream. I said, well, okay, is it 2 of the scoops? If I bought 2 single scoop cups, is it basically 2 of those in 1 cup? And that's what I'm getting for the price. Mm-hmm. Or is it 2 differently sized scoops than that? And that's what your 2 scoop cup is. And she said, well, it's 2 scoops. It's a double scoop. So I, being unsatisfied and kind of feeling like I was getting what I was going for, like she'd already answered my question. I said, okay, so I see that you stick it on a scale and weigh it. And that's how you figure out how much you should give me, right? Which is fine. That's norming, like Starbucks does or whatever in coffee. Mm-hmm. And finally she said, well, okay, so the double scoop cup is 2 smaller scoops and the single scoop cup is 1 large scoop. And I said, so you're not giving me 2 scoops of ice cream. You've given me 2 modified scoops of ice cream. Now I didn't press it further, but I came home and I said to my wife, I relayed the information, and right away she said, that's deceptive, right? Because what they're making you believe based on their price list in their place of business and what they're telling you is they're giving you this idea that you're getting a good deal and you're getting this much if you buy the big, the 2 scoop one. And I think most people, most patrons, right, would feel the same kind of, man, I'm being lied to here. Like this is you're not giving me the straight answer. Like you're manipulating me in the patron in some way to make them believe one thing when in actuality you're doing another. And I think that's a really great example of the second principle, because the second version of the categorical imperative, because what's being done there, there's nothing wrong on Kant's view with a business making a profit, but mm-hmm. how you make a profit matters. Mm-hmm. And so if you're deceiving your consumer to boost your profits, and you're essentially deception's a form of lying, right? You're not laying it out there plain for them to reason about it. And they have to kind of figure out the gerrymandering that's going on their own. Well, then what's gone on there, right, is the consumer's being used as a mere means, right? They're not being treated as someone who should be valued in their own right as a consumer and is worthy of the truth, regardless of what the consequences would be. And so I think what you get here, right, is you get this sort of, as you said, most people would go, I feel like I was mistreated in some way there. Like I like your product, but I feel like I'm worthy of better treatment than that participating in this exchange of goods and services. So yeah. I don't know if that helps a little bit, but I think that's a good example where I think in everyday, what seems to be humdrum going about in human relationship, but especially in business exchange, I think very often there are improprieties like this that violate the second version, where either the consumer is being treated as reduced to a mere means, or employees by a consumer who mistreats a cashier and says mean and nasty things because their food came out to them burnt or something like this. In those ways, what ends up happening is one party there is being degraded. They're being treated as something less than human, and they're worthy to be treated as full human, which is to be respected, highly regarded, not manipulated or demeaned in any way. And I think most of us have a lot of ready examples where we would just go, yeah, that's pretty clearly, an example of where a person is being demeaned or degraded as a person.
No, I think that was a great example. Now I feel like what you kind of said, there are a lot of examples out there that seem very clear cut or very easy in that way. But there's one that I think everyone kind of falls back to that is not so easy and clear cut. So lying to Nazis to hide Jews.
Good.
there like that. So let's dive into this little thought experience. So the way that I remember it kind of being set up is that, you know, you're in your time of the Holocaust, you're helping the Jews escape, you know, extermination, and you're hiding them in your house. Kind of reminds me of like I think it's the movie Inglorious Bastards, where the opening scene is where he's hiding the Jews right down, and then you have um, the German officers right at the doorstep. So what do you do? And so, yeah, if you want to pick that up, what would Kant have us do?
Well, I think this is a great test case, and one that is often brought up, not just in ethics discussions generally, but particularly with relation to Kant. So again, why this is a great example or potential counterexample, just to bear in mind for the listener. For Kant, once we know what our moral duties are, they're there, they're binding, whether we like them or not. Number two, all duties are equally binding. They have equal weight. We have equal obligation to make good on those duties, to fulfill them. What's going on in this case that presses on those commitments is that it seems pretty clear that you have a few Kantian duties in play all at the same time that you can't satisfy all at the same time. Number one, you've implicitly, right, if not explicitly, promised to provide safe haven for the Jews that you've taken into your home. You're trying to protect them. You believe them to be innocent. They probably understood that. You think that they're innocent and not worthy of the treatment of the Nazis. And so you're hiding them. So you've got a promise to fulfill there to protect them. Number two, and right for Kant, promises, you should only make promises you intend to keep. This looks on the surface like you've intended to keep it, right, by bringing them in. Number two, you ought to always tell the truth. Lying is never morally justified on Kant's view. So I know I've spoiled it a little bit, but again, when we talk about false promise keeping, you've got a mix between truth telling and promises and so on. But for Kant, right, you could see why lying is always wrong for him two ways. One is we could run through the first version of the categorical imperative. We're going to lead to inconsistencies, practically and even logically, where I'm both willing that you tell me the truth, but I'm willing that I not tell the truth, or something like this. And that's not socially sustainable if we're willing that people, lie when they want to or something. Well, then that's going to lead to too much lying and the breakdown of trust, social trust, and this sort of thing. So most people have the intuition on this case. Well, dude, lie to the Nazis. They don't deserve to be told the truth. I mean, these are horrible people, and we know what they intend to do. This isn't murky water, right? But for Kant, you've got this conflict, and this is the objection between telling the truth, which would lead to the sure death of these innocent people, or keeping your promise. What can we do here? Is there anything Kant can do? And in my view, there's nothing Kant proper can do. This is, I think there's got to be some modification made, which we can delve into. But for him, right, you do have the obligation to tell the truth. Now, here are some caveats, right? Let's suppose you could avoid lying and somehow withhold information. Withholding information would not be wrong. So a lie is the intentional telling of a falsehood to these people, like, no, I don't have Jews in my house, or something like this. But if they ask you questions that you could answer honestly without giving up these people's position in your home, well, then you don't have a problem. If there's a way for you to sneak them out the back, right, and take them to another hideout, okay, well, then you resolve the dilemma. But let's suppose you don't have those options open to you, right? And you're being asked very direct questions and you believe you should tell the truth. Well, okay, you've got this conflict. This is where we get into, I think, one of two options. Either you stay a Kantian and you modify your Kantianism in some way. Maybe there's either an additional principle you want to add in that's like a deal breaker, a way of breaking the stalemate, so to speak, and helping you navigate this. Or the most common, I think, is for deontologists to go the route of someone like W.D. Ross, who's probably the most famous deontologist, most influential deontologist since Kant. And he's not a Kantian in the proper sense of the term, but he's in the neighborhood. And so we can go there now if you want, or we can return back to that. But I think that's a really strong objection to Kant. And maybe the only other thing I would add there is, unless there's a way through the third version of the categorical imperative to say, well, there's a way to harmonize the ends you're pursuing for all parties involved by lying, which I don't think you're going to be able to do, sticking strictly to Kant's theory. That would be the only other potential way to resolve apparent moral dilemmas. But I think this is a tidy one that presses on Kant's view proper, right? So his own view that the two absolutes are conflicting and there's no way to make good on both of them.
Yeah. So there's some thoughts I want to say on this one, and then we can move on to kind of a W.D. Ross modification, because I agree that's where you have to go, I think, right, to I guess either save the theory or just you have to modify it in some way, because it does seem clear cut. And I would say, I think for most people, it is a very clear cut case. It is that you lie, you believe all these things are being unjust. The people that you're hiding, they're being treated as mere means, as an end to an end. And so like my first intuition is like, yeah, you have to lie to them, but it's like, okay, well, is there any exception to this rule? So can you kind of, what you highlighted already, can you tell the truth while maintaining kind of I guess integrity, I guess, for what Kant is wanting us? So there seems to be, I don't know, strong exceptions to rules. So like I'm thinking of, and this isn't quite analogous, but I'm thinking, so like, for example, like Sam Harris has used an analogy of like playing chess, right? So one can look at the principles of chess, such as, operating on a principle of never sacrificing your queen. Like we can operate on that principle without exception, really. But there are cases where you may just have to, sacrifice the queen. And maybe sometimes there are cases where that's the best thing that you can do. Well, it doesn't, and it's not saying that therefore the rule is either false or the rule isn't good or that sacrificing makes it good. It's just, this is kind of the situation we're in. And this is out of all our options, out of our finite options, this is the best one. And this is one that we should operate on for this specific situation. So that's kind of how I was looking at it a little bit. But yeah, if you have any thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much to add on that one. I think I like the Sam Harris thing being brought in here, that analogy to chess. There are, let me just register this, given that we've had multiple conversations now. For some people, particularly deontologists, I think of different varieties might have an issue with that example because it's a non-moral example, right? The losing the chess piece isn't morally significant. It's significant within your game and with the objective of winning. But I think and I've heard people do this, they'll press on the analogy. They get what he's going for, but where the analogy tends to break down in a significant way is that it's a non-moral example, moral example. So I just want to put that out there for food for thought. But sticking with that, it's helpful, at least in part. I think what you're going for is an important point, namely that there are certain cases like this, lying to horrible people to save an innocent life. And we could revise it in light of today, right? If we take the Nazis and the Jews out of it, I mean, we could imagine a real closer to home scenario where, let's suppose there's some kind of, I don't know, domestic extremist of some kind, or a terrorist that, we know intends to do harm. And here they are standing at your door, and, an hour prior, someone's knocked on your door and they're beaten badly. And they say, hey, this, and let's just suppose you've seen this all over the news all day about this individual or them in their group that are bad people. And now you've got someone who's been victimized by them out there on the streets for some reason, and they're looking for help. Well, I mean, that makes it closer to home. Like, would it be okay to lie, or would it be actually really morally bad for you to give them up? And I think most people have the intuition, regardless of whether they're you might be neither a utilitarian nor a Kantian. Go, in some hard cases like this, you should break the rule. So what we really need, the problem isn't with like you said. What I like that you said is it's not the rule itself that's the problem. It's how we think about the stringency of the rules. Is there a way to oppose, aside from giving up the rule altogether, or just making it look like you're helping yourself, put something into place that say that there's a way to adjust the rule rationally to say that, no, there's clearly still an objectively right thing to do here. And in this case, you ought to tell a lie. And you ought to tell the lie because it's an exceptional case. Okay, W.D. Ross says something, if I can bring this up here. He says, yes, here's how to do it. But you got to give up your absolutism. You can still be an objectivist, but we have to view the principles or the moral rules, if you will, as still binding uh, and objectively true. That's not true because I like it or true because you like it. He thinks we can get a rough and ready working list to start from. And he gives, let's see if I got it here written down, like a list of 7. He has promise keeping and fidelity, gratitude, beneficence, justice, self-improvement, non-malfeasance. Okay, now whether or not you like all those, my point is just to say that he thinks that, like with Kant, we can have a working set of moral rules to start from that we all agree are objectively, rationally established as true. We've discerned them from the way the world is, not because we like them or not. Okay, good. Now he mentioned some language here that we got to get on the table. He distinguishes between what he calls a prima facie duty versus an ultima facie duty. Now, those are 2 Latin phrases, and don't let them scare you. Prima facie just means initially, from where we start, we've got this set of rules that they're true, objectively binding. But we don't start just in this abstract vacuum, right? We start, or at least we find ourselves in this really murky social space with others where we interact, and there are other morally relevant pieces that bear on how we evaluate what we ought to do in a given case, what the duty or duties in play are, and which one. Now here's the key move: which one should be ranked the highest and why. So in his view, there always is still something you ought to do, and you can know what it is. But since the principles are not inflexible and absolute, they're other things being equal, they're binding. Well, once you add other things in, now you have to discern. You can come to discern and figure out which one is the most binding in that case. And in the case with the Nazis and Jews that you gave, Jacob, well, it's going to be saving innocent lives. And it's not because lying is okay. Generally, lying is generally wrong. It's that all things considered, given the exceptional nature of the case, what rises to the top is innocent human life, not these very bad people in some, and maybe part of it is they don't deserve to be told the truth in this case or something. But he thinks that once you take all that into account, now you go ultima facie, all things considered, all moral relevant considerations on the table and before your mind, you can know, yeah, I got to protect these people. And it's not necessarily that promising is the more weighty one. It's the innocent lives, right? It's the human life. And in the Kantian spirit, that's a really, a Kantian could welcome that, because for Kant, right, human morality is about human and another moral rational agency. That's where the heart of the value system lies, is promoting the good of immeasurably worthy beings, respecting their dignity, as he would say. And so we get to do that here, right? We get to respect and promote the dignity and safeguard the dignity of these innocent people. What we have to do that, all things considered, is lie to these not so innocent people, really. And I think this is my own view now, I think a deontologist could also add in here a kind of principle of forfeiture, it's called, where, and this isn't Kant now, just to be clear, but I think someone who's W.D. Ross could also have this as part of their set of moral principles, which is, well, maybe there's certain kinds of actions you could perform or engage in that demonstrate that you're willfully giving up, forfeiting the claim you have on certain duties being performed towards you, right? Namely, being told the truth in this case. And so if you're part of an evil group of people that intends to destroy other lives, you've forfeited the right to be told the truth in this particular case. And so that becomes part of the all things considered rationale for why it is that protecting the innocent lives rises to the top as the guiding principle. That's the objectively binding principle that he would say, if you go contrary to that, you're actually doing the wrong thing. But that would be one way to resolve this kind of tension. Now, that's not Kant's way to go at it, to be clear, but that is a deontological and a really common one, to say that we can intuit. I think you used intuitionism. You brought this up previously. You kind of cognitively grasp immediately in your reasoning and in the moral experience of things what you ought to do as you weigh all your principles together.
It also kind of reminds me, so going back to what you mentioned, kind of the principle of forfeiture, but also kind of a principle of like I think it's the doctrine of double effect. So kind of going back to like the Nazi example, I mean, all things considered, if my intent is to save a person's life, like that's, or to save these people's life, that's my intention. That's kind of like maybe, I don't know if you can, I wouldn't say you can reduce this down to like the mental state, but that's kind of like what is going on in my mind. I am actively trying to save these people's lives. Well, as a result of that, if they are misled some information, um, is that a way to square it? I don't know if if I'm trying to get what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that it's kind of like an unintended consequence. Like my intention is to save people's life, and it's an unintended consequence that I'm not going to tell them the truth. Like I'm not intending necessarily to be deceitful. I'm intending to save people's lives. And as a result of saving people's lives, I end up not telling the truth.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you could go at it that way. And just for our listeners, this principle of double effect comes up in another, someone might call it a deontological theory, what's called natural law ethics. But it could come up here, and some people, depending on, scholars disagree about everything, but some would put Kant in that broad tradition, and that's because he was influenced by uh, natural law theorists in his time. And so, yeah, what you might say here, now this isn't Kant's view again, but broadly Kantian type of person might say, well, look, sometimes when we act, like in these really hard cases, we perform an action, but it produces a good result and a negative result. Now the question is, again, we're not consequentialists in doing this. The question is, what is my root intention? What is the key motivator? What is it that I'm really trying to bring about? Like you said, and you said, if what I'm really trying to bring about here is protect innocent people, and I have an unintended but foreseen, okay, I foresee it, but I don't really intend to be a liar or be a deceiver, but that's an unintended thing I have to do to will the good here, which is protecting innocent life. Well, then it would be justified on what's called the principle of double effect, that I lie to save innocent lives. Now, there would be some debate about the proponents of that uh, principle of double effect, just to put that out there, of whether that's the way you could reason. But I can imagine someone who does hold to that, to say that you could use that principle as well as forfeiture. You could use those together to justify lying in that particular kind of case.
Is there
So it would be
another?
permissible. Let me just say this: lying would be, at least on that way of going at it, it would be permissible, but not obligatory. So I think the double effect people would say you're allowed morally to either lie or not lie, but I think that would be less strong than maybe a deontologist like Ross might say. No, that's what you should do. You should lie, because the main principle to act on here is, it's not just that you're permitted to lie to save the innocent lives. It's that you're obligated to save the innocent lives, and you got to, lie to do that. So there's a subtle difference, but an important one. I think they're just in the rational structure of how you reason to the same conclusion there.
So I don't know if W.D. Ross, I haven't read much of his work, but do you think maybe if he would agree with this or not, but it sounded to me when you're as to describing kind of his view a little bit, that there is a certain threshold of like when an action would be permissible. I don't know if that's kind of a view he would have.
I'm not honestly familiar with that language. I mean, I could take a guess, but of what I think you're going for, but I haven't. I'm not familiar with what you're kind of going for. So maybe if you want to say a little bit more about that, I'd be happy to.
Let me see if I can set up the thought experiment. So the thought experiment is that there's a terrorist out there. He's gonna murder. He's gonna nuke country, and you happen to have like his family member. In this case, it's his daughter. Is it ever permissible to do something like that? Because of the lives that are at stake, and so it's the one life versus, and it's not just many lives, it's billions of lives that would be at stake. And so I was just wondering about something. I would say like a threshold deontologist would say generally that's something wrong, but there is a threshold to where we have to just, that action is permissible or something like that. So
yeah, I don't know that that's W.D. Ross's approach, but I could imagine someone, again, I'm just thinking theoretically, could. It almost sounded like what you did there, and I don't know if this is what you intended to do, there's almost it sounded like a subtle marriage between some kind of deontology and a kind of utilitarianism,
Yeah.
which, you know, as I've had teachers in the past say, welcome to the wild world of philosophy, you know. So if you
Mhm.
can make it work logically, I mean, you know, I guess that might be a possibility where you say there's a threshold. But I can imagine other deontologists saying that are maybe more pure in form, that uh, our principles are probably going to lead to, or should lead to, where whichever one's in place in the case of the child that you mentioned, torturing a child to save a bunch of lives, you know, that probably wouldn't be justified. You'd have to go some utilitarian route
Mhm.
to really justify it. Like you say, there's so
Mhm.
much at stake or something. There's a threshold. I get what you're going for with that term, but yeah, I don't know. I can imagine people reasoning that way. It sounds more, again, consequentialist to me than deontological, because most deontological views, even the ones that are comfortable ranking principles, as far as I understand them, the principles are pretty, by and large, consistent in terms of what they're going to issue for us to do in an action guiding sense. There could be these really, there will be hard cases where we have to figure out what to do, but we're going to immediately intuit it, and it's not going to be like, again, more of a straightforward deontology. It's not going to be because of consequences that are really bad because we're crossing some threshold or hitting, you know, we've hit the ceiling or something. It's just that, you know, that special case gives me, when I reflect on all the relevant principles, I immediately come to know and intuit which one I should act on the basis of. But again, I could see the purest deontologist wanting to say it's apart from the consequences, because usually they don't want to be consequentialists, right? They're motivated to be deontologists for for misgivings they have about
Mhm.
utilitarianism and that sort of thing.
Which is something we kind of talked about in our last episode, because
Right.
now we're just mainly talking about what is it about this action, regardless of the consequences or the principle. And we're saying that principle is either good in and of itself. It's not good because it accomplishes an end goal. And so just to kind of, I think, kind of clarify a little bit too, this is from my understanding, what makes it objective is that it's not like because I'm saying it's good or you're saying it's good. It's that when we're having a conversation about what good is or goodness, we can analyze what is good, and from there, through our reason, we are kind of deducing actions that would be good, or guiding, or principles that are action guiding, um, on how we are to interact with people.
Yeah, so it's a very reason centered. I would say generally these are reason centered and principle centered um, ethical systems, as opposed to consequences centered. And what's important with that, why that's important, is you could deduce, like Kant did, or I think in some cases with W.D. Ross, the intuition isn't necessarily that you're working through logical steps. You could just, as you bring the principles before your mind in light of the case at hand, you just immediately, you kind of have, and again, this is going to depend on other parts of your view of the world, so to speak. Uh, you might believe we have some special cognitive faculty that uh, enables us to immediately grasp uh, abstract principles, or even less than abstract ones, as we just, again, reflect on the case and we immediately see before our minds what we ought to do. We immediately intuit it. And so intuition here isn't, you know, I think there, this leads to, when that word comes up, people get a lot of funky ideas because of how that's used in popular culture. Intuition means like a feeling or a gut
Mhm.
reaction. You know, you hear that on like, uh, you know, police shows and this sort of thing. That's not what's in mind here, right? The concept of intuition is that it's a cognitive, either faculty or aspect of our cognition, where we immediately kind of see in our mind's eye, so to speak, or immediately grasp 2 + 2 is 4, right? That would be mathematical intuition. Once we understand all the concepts in play, we immediately grasp, we have this mental insight, so to speak. Now, that could be through deduction, it could be through induction, or it could just be even immediately. So if you saw, for example, I don't know, you're in a store and you saw someone being exploited by the owner, and it's not like you reason through a series of premises, you just immediately go, that's messed up. That's wrong. Well, that would be an example of moral intuitionism in a real generic sense, where we immediately just have the sense that what we're experiencing is wrong. And so our moral perception delivers to us what we now know to be objectively wrong or objectively right. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. And just to kind of clarify as well a little bit with ethical intuitionism, it's kind of like it's their intellectual, they can be intellectual or kind of sensory appearances that can be known kind of that are self-evidently true, at least kind of prima facie, right? To where they seem to be true prior to any argument. So for example, like Michael Humer might say, like, from this phenomenal conservatism, like it appears that I'm in a reality, right? That I'm having a conversation with someone. This is prior before any argument. It's just, this is what my sense experience is kind of telling me. And I'm intuiting that this is the case before any argument is ever given. And the same thing could be kind of what you highlighted kind of towards mathematical intuitions or using logic. And so these are kind of ways of intuitions that kind of.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Michael Humer. He's a great example to bring in here, and he's got a couple books on this stuff. But and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's a intuitionist of a kind. And so, with one of the other things you brought up here, the way we kind of state this is, if it seems to me that P, right, is just a premise. If it seems to me that this is wrong, well, then that gives me an at face value reason for believing and even claiming to know that it's wrong. Now, that could be revised on the basis of further information, sensory information, like you said, empirical information. Other intuitionists, might say, when I reflect on the principle I think is most weighty in this case, it seems to me that this is the most weighty one. So I have a prima facie reason for thinking it is.
Yeah.
And so it could be that the reflection on the principle gives us the cognitive response, so to speak. It could be experiencing the activity itself gives us the seeming. And so seemings, and there's a literature on seemings, but seemings are something like a unique cognitive insight or a reaction or cognitive attitude, or it just depends on who you talk to, but it's a unique cognitive state maybe that is responsive to the evidence of experience. It could be sensory, like you said.
Yeah. And so just to also say that definitely not all intuitions are made equal. So people who might misuse or overuse, well, this is just what my intuition says. Okay, well, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about certain things that seem very strong. Like, for example, like that we're in a reality, we're in a shared reality. It seems very true, self-evidently true that we're in a reality, or we're experiencing something.
Yeah, so I think your concern is that, and tell me if I'm not hearing you right. Sometimes we use intuition. I mean, we do this in philosophy too. What are we draw out our philosophical kind of leanings on a particular issue, and that's okay. That has a place, but that's by no means a final say. And you go, well, hey, I have, Bogosian's got this intuition on this thought experiment, but I got a different one, so we're both right. No, that's not what's going on here.
Yes.
It counts, right? That counts, and it's a kind of data that matters in our discussion and debate, maybe. However, that's different than intuitionism as a approach to moral knowledge, which is stronger than that. It's saying that once you grasp the principle fully, you really immediately know it, or at least prima facie know it, and that could be defeated or overturned because we're fallible and because we gain more information. But once we really even have all the, as far as we can tell, adequate evidence, let's say, you mentioned self-evident. Further reflection on the principle, relevant principle, it'd be self-evidently true. And so what won't work is for me to say back to you, well, that's not self-evidently true to me. Now I can say that, but that doesn't mean you're wrong and I'm right or something like that. At most, what that indicates is that there's some breakdown here. Either I've got it wrong, or you've got it wrong, or we're both wrong and we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out why we're both mistaken and what needs to be better, thought through. But yeah, it's not like a weak, soft kind of intellectual leaning on an issue. It's a strong cognitive grasp of intuitions, or strong cognitive grasps of concepts and principles that matter to how we act in this case.
Yeah, are there any further objections that we want to touch upon before we end?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of really important and interesting ones here worth bringing up that'll help us, I think, keep things clear about what he's saying and not saying. The first one is an objection that takes us back to the first way of stating the categorical imperative. That was the one that, we should act only on the principle that we can at the same time do it ourselves and universalize it for everyone else to do it. Some people might say, well, here's an example, a counterexample to that principle, namely that we could universalize this principle, and it gets us a really morally severe and atrocious result, and that's not what Kant wants. And so then maybe the categorical imperative is faulty. And it goes like this. It says, well, let's suppose we write a maxim about mandating genocide, and let's make it particular to Americans. Always kill Americans. So that's our action guiding principle. Well, it turns out you not only could do that, you could mandate it for yourself, will it for yourself, but you could also will it for any other non-American, right? Where now, not for Americans, but that wouldn't lead to a contradiction, right? Because there'd be all these other non-Americans on the planet that would be able to also will it without it leading to an inconsistency, even without it leading to the breakdown of social cohesion. Because let's say, hey, let's go with it sounds bad, but this is the idea, the thrust of the objection. Well, we could do with one less people group. I mean, sound familiar, right? Historically. So, and you'd still have plenty of other people groups alive, right? And flourishing. And so what this almost sounds like is that unintentionally Kantian ethics could morally justify genocide. What might Kant say about this? This is where I think Kant and Kantians will typically say, well, look, if the categorical imperative ever leads to a rationale that devalues humans, whoever they are, then something's gone wrong in our reasoning somewhere. Because remember, the second version of the categorical imperative is about never treating humans merely as means. We have to treat all humans as ends in themselves, that is, with dignity and respect. Genocide clearly violates that. And so what we've got here is a misunderstanding or application of the first reading of the categorical imperative. And the other readings, the other two legs of the triangle, let's say, can be brought in to help us gain the clarity we need to see that genocide would never be morally justified. That's the first objection. The second objection is now maybe a pushback here to the second reading of not using people as mere means, but treating them only as ends. And someone might say, well, okay, the way you get that principle is to see humanity as rational beings, which Kant does, and place a real high price tag on our rational nature, right? And that's what distinguishes us, in his view, from non-rational creatures like your home pet, dogs, cats, even maybe other animals that many people consume, let's say. So cows and deer, if you're a hunter, or what have you. So what does this mean for two things is the objection? Well, doesn't this imply that rationality being so important comes on a spectrum or a scale where higher functioning rational beings have a greater amount of value and worth and dignity, and therefore are worthy of different kinds of treatment than those with lower rational expressions, let's say, expressions or uses of their rationality. Number one. And number two, does this allow us to treat, even harm, non-rational creatures? So let's take those in turn. The first tier of the objection there is really going to the heart of, well, what do we do with people, humans, who aren't Albert Einstein and who aren't you or me even, right? Not that we're Albert Einstein for sure, but whose cognitive abilities are different. They might not ever be able to go to college or teach a college class, let's say. Maybe they have cognitive limitations for whatever set of reasons, natural endowments, they've suffered an injury. Okay, that seems to now look like lesser rationality means lesser human means lesser treatment. That's not what Kant's going for, so we've got attention. What I think Kant would actually say to that one is, what matters is that there is an inherent human capacity called rationality. And so all humans, regardless of age, regardless of use of that capacity, have that capacity as it is. They have rationality as such, and that is enough to pin down, to ground human dignity. It's not about the use of the capacity, because even really intelligent people can misuse the capacity for all sorts of bad things, or just he has one thing we didn't talk about, but he thinks failing to cultivate your talents is wrong. We can come back to that if we have time, but that's really interesting, because really what he's going for that applies here is that you could choose to cultivate your capacities or not, and it might be wrong to not cultivate your capacities, but the fact that you have a lesser ability wouldn't mean that you're doing something wrong, because that's, let's say, no fault of your own. It just means that the capacity, kind of like my capacity for jumping, I have the capacity for jumping being a human, but I can only actualize that so far. I can't actualize it far enough to dunk on a regulation basketball rim. Now that means I can't do certain things in life, but that doesn't make me lesser human any more than, I'm not going to be a particle physicist makes me less human, any more than someone with, let's say, Down syndrome. This has been in the news recently. The fact that they may not have certain abilities cognitively wouldn't make them less human on Kant's view. It just means that the capacity that they do possess, which is the same as any other human, just can't be actualized in those relevant ways. And what matters for moral value and dignity and treatment is having the capacity at all. Now that leaves him open to the second part of the objection, which is, well, what about animals that are non-human animals, right? That are non-rational. Well, this is where maybe many people get very uncomfortable with Kant, at least. And this wouldn't apply to all deontology, but for Kant, he says, well, no, the reason we non-human animals are not worthy, they have no rights. They're not worthy of any particular treatment because they're not rational. And so you can eat them. Not that he's not for, misusing, running a dog fighting ring. I don't think he would be okay with that. But if you want to say that eating them is a harm, well, then that would be okay on his view. I think other more recent Kantian, so I don't, that's where he's at. So if that's a big issue for you, then that might be a key objection to think about further. I think someone like him could say is that even if they're not rational beings, being a rational agent brings with it a certain kind of responsibility to use your rationality to care for living things and promote their being a living thing in the relevant kinds of ways. And so if you're abusing animals, you've clearly violated some kind of basic decency and harm principle there. Now, will that get you all the way to vegetarianism on moral, kind of deontological moral grounds? Maybe not. I think someone who is a vegetarian or vegan could probably be a deontologist and supplement their deontology with other principles, like a harm principle to sentient beings or something like this. Beings that feel pain, even though they're not rational, if you want to give him that premise. I don't know that that would be enough to rule out saying that it's okay to eat animals. I think there would be an open debate between deontologists about that issue. But I think what's important for at least Kant is that the rationality is carrying all the weight there. So feel free to follow either of those up if you'd like.
Recently, I've been attempting to be vegan. I understand what Kant was trying to do, like where he relies heavily on the capacity for rationality, but it's also kind of like, well, I'm not seeing, I guess, that justification to where what we're currently doing with animals, and how would I square something like this, where I think I would go the route that you went to, where kind of, well, it's not necessarily the capacity for rationality, it's the sentience of the being and the capacity to feel pain and pleasure.
No, I think that's a common, the route that you want to take there with sentience is a common line that people who share your view in terms of dietary disciplines, let's say, on moral grounds, it brings in that important empirical data of what the pain, like you said, pain or lack thereof, that such creatures can experience.
So I think this is a good segue into kind of our closing remarks. And
Sure.
just to kind of highlight everything, what we've mainly been talking about is Kantian ethics. as a form of deontology. And we, throughout this kind of little mini series, as I stated previously, there are definitely other types of ethics out there, such as virtue ethics, kind of evolutionary ethics that we didn't really touch upon just because I felt, like I said, these are the main ones that I feel people either have intuitions on or people that I hear kind of given rationalizations for. And so just to make that clear once again, that there are plenty out there, there's plenty in the literature to go and check out and read about. Is there anything that you would like to say as a closing or?
No, I think that's a great reminder. And, what I always like to do is I think it's great to, as you're thinking about these things and finding new things to think about and to be challenged with, be curious and track down your curiosity and pursue that, and, look into things as they arise. Because I think the importance, as Jacob and I believe we agree on here, the significance of this discussion is that, the moral domain is important, right? It's important not just to oneself and how I live, but it affects ultimately how you live in relation to others, other humans, and as well as came up today, to the planet and the world, non-human creatures as well. So keep thinking about it, keep pursuing the things that are troubling you. I'm very appreciative that I've had the opportunity to have these conversations with you.
Yeah, no problem. And I'm glad to have you on. Last thing before we kind of close out, is there a way that people can either connect with you or find you? I know you're definitely a teacher at Clovis Community here in Fresno, but do you have any social media platforms that people can reach out to you if they have questions or?
Sure. I think the best way to reach me would be, and you could post this if you wanted, would be my email at the school. So that's my first name, Chad.Bogosian, my last name, Bogosian, at cloviscollege.edu. And I would be happy to correspond with anybody who's interested, and we could take it from there. I'm on social media, loosely speaking. I'm not good at it, and I don't do a lot on it. So that's, at this time at least, is not the best
Mhm.
route to connect with me on. But I'd be happy to connect with anybody who would like to over email, and I'll do my best to respond within 24 to 48 hours, and keep the conversation going. So
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you for coming back on the podcast, and thanks for whoever's listening.
thanks so much for having me.
And that concludes another episode of the Reason Through podcast. If you find value in what I've been doing, please consider liking, sharing, rating, and reviewing the podcast, as it shows your support, and I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.